Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode. My name is Dana, and my guest today is Ben Guttman. Welcome, Ben.
Hey, how's it going, Dana?
Good. How are you doing?
Good.
Good, good. Okay, well, before we get started, why don't you take a minute, tell us a little bit about you, what you do, all that kind of good stuff.
Okay, so by day I'm an insurance broker. The rest of the time I'm a dad, as you can see behind me. They did some wall art for me. I'm in the middle of getting that fixed. Um, I also completely different than insurance. Also sing in a wedding band, so that's a little bit of a break from
That's
the
cool.
monotony of forms. So yeah, it's a fun balance.
That is.
Kind
That's
of
a nice balance.
yeah, I get to have that alter ego going. Like most people in insurance, completely ended up in it by accident and then fell in love with it. The ability to help people with protecting everything, whether it's their personal side of their life or their business side. There's just so many things that people don't know about, and most of my day is solving problems people don't know they have, or solving problems created by trying to do it on the cheap. When all that did was throw money after nothing, because
Mm-hmm.
again, you're buying trust and buying a contract, and if you don't read it, it's kind of like when you click the Apple terms and conditions and you have no idea what you just signed up for.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yes.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So been in
Yep.
been in the insurance industry for 10 years. Had a little brief foray in between agencies where I did some copier sales, mostly because I wanted the benefits, while I was looking for another agency to join. Um, and that's when I got introduced to IoT, the Internet of Things. And we were super cutting edge. We were the first ones with self encrypting hard drives. We were talking about all this stuff before it was cool. And that's why when I went back on the independent side and was brokering policies, the cyber stuff that everyone was like, yeah, that'll never happen. I'm like, it's going to happen. It is
Mm-hmm.
happening. And that's kind of how I fell into trying to get people on board with realizing that if it's connected to the internet, something can happen.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. And one of the topics that we're going to talk about today, obviously, is going to be cyber insurance and why it's gotten so complicated. And I think it's interesting if you go back even just 5 years ago, there were a lot of people that were like, cyber insurance, what is that? Then came the phase where people were like, well, we have insurance. We don't need to do anything, right? Doesn't matter. And now we're in a whole different world. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
Sounds good. It's a different
Yes.
world, and we're about
Yes.
to enter another year of the unknown.
Mm-hmm. So, all right, let's talk about this. So, why has the price of cyber insurance skyrocketed?
So, to put it simply, a lot of claims and a lot more risk out there. Criminals realized how profitable it was. I mean, by way of example, and this is usually how I discuss it with people, you have insurance in every other aspect of your business, right? If someone broke into your storefront, if that's what you have, or your office, you have insurance for that. You have insurance if someone sues you, whether it's the general liability, the professional liability. But the odds of any of those things happening, especially in the mind of the consumer, are fairly low. It'll never happen to me. That's what we all think. Probably one of my favorite books is called The Ostrich Paradox. It's written by a bunch of professors over at Wharton, and they basically say why we're so bad at judging risk when we see it happen every day. Right? We know if you're someone living in Florida, there's going to be hurricanes. Why don't we purchase wind insurance?
Mm-hmm.
We know that then they talk about the horrible decisions people make when they're in it because it's a different part of your brain that's reacting versus, what needs to make that decision. Pretty fascinating stuff. Didn't realize I was going to have to go into psych to sell insurance policy. Um, but yeah, the problem really is that we're horrible at gauging risk, and it'll never happen to us. But the reality is for a cyber criminal, you could sit at home in your pajamas and do this stuff and make a good living, and there's very little risk of getting caught or getting prosecuted. So it's a lot easier than just breaking into a place that's got cameras and has a security guard. So why wouldn't you take the easier route? It's a path of least resistance. And that's before you get into state sponsored, you know, crime where you have like, Russian crime syndicates or Chinese crime syndicates. And their governments are like, as long as you aren't going after our people, all's fair in love and war. And it's like, yeah, go take money from the Americans, please. Um, so you have also, it's coming at you from all sides. It's coming at you, I think people really always thought it was the guy in their mom's basement who just wanted to like spam you out of $50 for, beer and cigarettes.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's gotten much more complex, and they're targeting even more complex companies. So it used to be that, okay, you'd get the grandma or grandpa who went to the bank and wired them money because, the great deal. I mean, I think the beginning of this whole thing was the Nigerian princes trying to get their money into the country. Um, but, that used to be what it was. And, I vividly remember, 8 or 9 years ago, talking to someone out of the bank who I knew personally. And they're like, should I do this? I'm like, probably a bad idea.
Mm-hmm.
But now it's really gotten to the point where they're much more sophisticated and they're getting successful attacks on businesses you would think are more savvy. I mean, there are law firms wiring 7 figures to places that they're never going to see again. I mean, there was a big thing with the international firm that ended up the person got fired, but if they get into your network and send it within your network, you don't even question it. The message comes from the CEO's spoofed email. It's coming inside the office stuff, so there's no like, hey, I'm checking to see if it's from Jim Bob at Yahoo, but no, it's from Bob in the office. So people are falling for it because it's more sophisticated, and they can sit on your network and learn your cadence and learn how the transaction flows and all that stuff. And with social media, they know when you're on vacation or you're speaking somewhere. So if you send an email that says, hey, I'm at this conference, sounds darn legit.
Yep.
So so part of the problem is they've got more sophisticated. They're getting more money for it. That definitely has led to it, which leads to more claims. And insurance is, by nature, a shared risk pool. And there's got to be enough money in the pot to pay it out when it happens. And that has led to a massive increase in pricing because the crooks have gotten better, the payouts are getting higher, and we need money to be able to take care of everybody if something happens. Otherwise, you have a TX situation. Totally different topic.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too, is that not only is it turning into not a legitimate, but a huge business where these hackers, there's help desks, there's everything. I mean, there is so much money in this that it's, why not go into it? And like you said, our mentality is, well, I'm not going to get hit. So it's, what do I have? I don't have anything of any value. That's what a lot of small and medium-sized businesses are saying. And okay, well, maybe it's not of any value to somebody else, but how much value is it up to you, right? And how would your clients feel if their information was exposed somewhere? And that's the kind of thing that we need to think about. And also, I'm sure we're going to get into this too, but some of the social engineering, this isn't necessarily some really high-tech hacker that's hacking into the network. It could be somebody who just fools one of your employees. So that's another whole nother.
Your defenses with anything are only as strong as your weakest link. So, and they know how to exploit that. So you could have all these things. There are people who spend tens of thousands of dollars on all these security, whatever it is. But if people are utilizing it, it's no different than having cameras at your business and not turning them on. Or you forgot to plug them in, and you get robbed overnight, and it's like, oh, good, we have cameras. Oops.
Yeah,
it happens all the time. You forget to lock the door. So employee holds the door for someone to let them into the building because they're carrying stuff, and next thing you know, something goes down. The weakest link is always the easiest way to get in, and that's really who they end up exploiting. So you could have all these, and where we saw a big problem with this, and part of why, again, the cost has gone up astronomically, is usually there's checks and balances in an office. So even if you have some older people, not that there aren't tech savvy older people, but if you have some older people who wouldn't be sure whether they should click on something or not, they'd go to the younger person in the next cubicle or whoever it is and say, hey, does this look legit? And I've answered that for people before. I'm like, don't open that. But COVID, everyone's working remotely. You don't have the same level of security that you have on your work server. You don't have the checks and balances of asking a coworker, like, hey, is this legit or not? It just became so much easier because you now know that all these employees are just kind of in the wind and, willy-nilly. And it's like, they took so much advantage of the fact, I'm trying to remember what the numbers were, but the amount of like fake sites and things that they made, like to get free COVID tests or to get, money from the government and everyone's looking for that stuff and everyone's like completely on edge. So they just fed off that anxiety.
Yep, that's for sure. Anxiety is definitely something. I always say anxiety and emotion, and when something has to happen right now, urgency, right? It's like, oh, you have to click on this right now. And then I always say to people, how many things in our lives really have to happen right now? Not a lot. and your Amazon account getting locked out of your Amazon account, that is not a 911 emergency. All right. So just think about that for a minute.
I don't know about that.
So anyway, okay.
Some people, Visa may call if they don't order something for 24 hours and ask if they're okay. But
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yep. All right. So now, obviously, this is sometimes what happens is people get so overwhelmed, like, well, there's nothing I can do. So I'm not even going to do anything because there's nothing I can do. You just said, some people are spending $10,000 and it's not even working. So why should I do anything? So what can companies do to help protect themselves?
So the simple answer is training and awareness. So the first thing is so many people, and now it's not as bad. You go back 5 years ago, people weren't even thinking about it. At least now people have seen places have it happen, and it's out there in the news. So somewhere in the way back of their mind, it at least exists as a possibility. Kind of like with any other disaster. It's like every year we forget that that people have house fires. And then every year you get to December and everyone's got, wires running out this way and that way for lights, or they have a menorah for Hanukkah or whatever it is. And every year we just had one, probably about 20 miles from our office. It's $300,000 two-alarm fire craziness. Thank God everyone's okay. But all of a sudden, when's the last time you thought about someone's house burning down? You never thought about it. And then it's on the news and you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Everybody has, completely ungrounded, and who knows who, some drunk guy put up the lights. It's just like, you don't think about it, but the reality is it happens. As I was telling someone the other day, every day on the way to work, you see a car accident, pretty much. Depends on your commute, obviously. Probably not if you're working from home. But, that person did not leave that morning thinking it was going to be them. And that's really what it is. So you're really putting, insurance and other, things that you're putting in place are just, it might happen, probably won't, but you want to protect yourself if it does, because you can't do anything about it afterwards.
Right.
So really with companies to protect themselves, you're looking for awareness, you're looking for training. There are plenty of companies out there that have trainings where they'll say you can send fake phishing emails and see who clicks on things. And then you can be like, hey, by the way, we're going to practice. A little bit of impulse control. And sometimes it's surprising who actually clicks on them and who doesn't. But that's a great way to, and I know multiple companies that do that. Like my place my sister works, they do it every month. And she was like going through emails. She's like, oh, here's that darn phishing thing again. Okay. I know which idiot's going to click on it. And then we're all going to have to come in and have a seminar on Tuesday, whatever it is. But that really, again, that's your first line of defense, is training your people. Then on the back end, obviously, you have to have antivirus. You have to have things that are tracking malware. You have to have, all these different security things. You could have an outsourced IT firm that's dealing with it, and different ones offer different, again, depending on your budget and depending on what your company, what your risk profile is. But the reality is everyone has some risk with this. There is, kind of like we talked about with them taking advantage of people during COVID, they don't have any morals. I've seen stories of people robbing, them hacking food banks.
Are you having a hard time finding new customers? A lot of folks just like you in the IT and cybersecurity space are in the same situation. And they have embraced a new opportunity to get new clients. They're doing this by growing their online presence and maximizing the power of LinkedIn. How, you ask? I have a tried and tested method called my Cyber Social Program. I myself have been on LinkedIn and now have over 3.5 million LinkedIn views, and over on YouTube, I have over 750,000 video views. So I can show you exactly how I have done that so that you can promote your organization and become the authority in your industry. And the best part is, I've done all of this organically without one paid ad. You don't need to waste your money over on Google with pay-per-click ads. Now's the time to establish yourself. Look around. The competition isn't doing it. This is your time to shine online before they do. So if you're ready to start your online journey and future-proof your business, please, down below, click the link and schedule a time for us to have a 45-minute call where I can review the exact methodology of the Cyber Social Program. You can also click below to see some of my masterclasses, which will give you quick little snippets of a couple of things you can do right away on LinkedIn that will help with your profile. I hope to see you and hear from you soon.
Or, name a charity, name, an organization that's out there doing something positive. I know synagogues that have gotten hacked. Like, they don't care who you are. They just want to make the money. So to anyone who says they don't have any risk, because why would they target me? I mean, if they could target, a synagogue or a homeless shelter, or they just want your data. They just want you to pay the ransom, whatever it is. They don't really care who and what you are and what you do. So that the whole, like, they don't want me, they want the high tech guys, is not a excuse. We're going to get into MFA a little bit, but now I know about it because we all sit there and complain every time we have to do it. Pretty much all the insurance carriers have done it now. So every time I want to log in, I put in, my username and password, and I either get a text or an email with your one-time use code to get in. And we all growl about it, but the reality is, you got to protect it. You have every single bit of data in there on these clients, and you got to protect it, because otherwise, your reputation is at stake, and then you can end up with all the fallout where you got to pay for notification costs and credit monitoring and all these things. It becomes very expensive, and it doesn't make you look good,
right?
At all, especially when you're the person pitching to be secure.
Yeah. Yep. So real quick, so you just mentioned that almost all the carriers are requiring MFA, and that has changed too over the last few years too. Before it was like, oh, travelers, you don't have MFA, they won't even give you a quote, kind of thing. I'm sure a lot of the other companies too out there were saying the same thing. But now, everyone has realized that's such an important little safety thing. Yes, it's a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of a hindrance when you're trying to log in, but it's not that big of a deal. And just like everything, once we all get used to it, then it's makes such a big difference that the harm of getting used to it, or whatever, the pain in the butt of getting used to it is nothing compared to what it's doing.
Yeah. So not everyone requires it below a certain threshold of revenue. Obviously, once you get into bigger sized companies, they're going to require it.
Yeah.
But I'm not even sure. In the past 6 months, they've cracked down on a lot of that. So we'll see where it goes. But there are, for companies that are nervous about implementing it or are seeing pushback, there are ways to still do it without MFA. But then again, it'll limit your options and may end up costing you more, because again, they want to see, the insurance carrier wants to see that you have skin in the game and that you're trying to protect yourself before they, take on that risk.
And even the forms now that basically your IT company has to fill out that, you are doing this, you are doing this. That's kind of new in the last couple of years, where, the person who works in the office who gets the application and they're like, well, I have no idea what any of this stuff is. I got to call, either if they have in-house IT or outsourced IT or whatever. And, one thing too, that I do want to point out here is not necessarily with the insurance aspect of it, but as far as the IT, I tell everybody, if you're in IT, your non-technical customers are going to think you're handling their cybersecurity, and they're two totally different things. And a lot of IT is shifting into also offering cybersecurity, but you can't think that just because you have an IT company that you have cybersecurity.
Correct. They are very not the same. And if you have a good IT guy, he'll tell you, like, this is not what I'm doing, but he should know someone who handles that.
Yes.
And I definitely have worked with MSPs that say, look, that's not our bread and butter, but this guy. And I have one guy in particular who, this is all he does. And he's got every day, the meme of the day, the hack of the day. He's got everything always going on his social media, and that's all he does. He helps nonprofits who think they have no risk, but they all are these massive organizations with a ton of employees and a ton of revenue. He just sits there all day and bangs in that message that if you don't take care of it, they don't care that you're, out there doing good for people. They're going to take it. And it's unfortunate, but again, they are always grossly, underserved in that arena, because they think we don't have any risk. They're working on a shoestring budget usually because they're trying to put the money back into their work. But again, it doesn't help you to cut corners with things when you could lose the whole operation.
Yep. That's for sure. And that's what's happening. And I think that that's what's going to make people kind of believe over the next couple of years is when, let's say, their direct competitor goes out, or if they are a nonprofit and they see another nonprofit that they're very close with, that goes under or whatever, that's when people are going to really wake up like, wow, it happened to them, it happened to my brother, it happened to this. And the closer it hits home, that's when I think the more of the reality, because it's definitely become there's been a lot more awareness over the last couple of years versus 5 years ago. Like you said, it was nothing really 5 years ago, but it's just still got to get a little bit closer to home. And so there's huge opportunities here for lots of businesses to be developing and offering these kind of services. I mean, somebody who helps non-technical employees learn what they should and shouldn't be doing, teach what they should and should. That's a huge opportunity out there right now, because they're the ones that are causing most of the problems when it comes to cybersecurity. It's not necessarily the firewall. So we got to worry about the people more than anything else. So.
Yes, the stats are something between like 80 to 90% of these things are human error.
Yes.
Which is, on one hand, mind-boggling, and on one hand, if you see what goes on in an average 9 to 5 day, not at all mind-boggling.
Exactly. It's like the drunk guy putting the lights up, right? Everybody can picture that in their head.
and like you said, the bigger problem is that, like, everything is so technical now, and it scares people off. And the reality is, you really just have to have someone that's willing to hold your hand and get it set up correctly. Because that's just the world we're in. Everything is very technical. For better or for worse. We kind of created our own problem, but there are incredible things that you're able to do with technology also. So it's kind of balancing that.
Yeah. There's a lot of positive. Yeah. Anyway, all right. So, why do small businesses need cyber insurance?
Because they're not just after the big guys, as we've been saying. There is no magic, they only target companies that are worth $100 million. That's just not a reality. In fact, the smaller they are, the less likely they are to have anything in place. So they're actually the low-hanging fruit. Why would, again, go back to our example of breaking into a store that's got cameras and security and everything. It's like, why would I do that? They have deterrents in place. Bob's Plumbing Store has thousands of, clients, all their data that I can then sell on the black market, and all I gotta do is like figure out Bob's password. It's probably like his wife's name or birthday. So that's the big thing, is that they think they're not a target. They're just as much a target, if not a larger target than larger businesses. Also, they don't have the money to deal with the fallout. You had some of these massive corporations that had hacks. Target, Equifax, whatever it is, it stinks for them that they have to deal with it, but they can drop $100 million on credit monitoring. You have a mom and pop place that's got 1,000 clients and all their stuff is out the window, and then you got to pay notification cost, and you got to pay for credit monitoring, and you got to pay for reputation, PR firm to deal with your reputation harm. You're out of business. I think, believe the stats are 60% of small businesses that get hacked are out of business in 6 months or less. And you don't hear about it because lots of small businesses go under all the time, and they don't want to embarrass themselves and say, "Oh yeah, it's because our password was password."
Right.
And that goes back to your point before about how it has to hit close to home for people to realize, but that's if people are talking about it, and that's with anything. It's like if you don't hear the reason why something happened, you just have your assumption and you go on with your life. But if you knew the guy next door went out of business because he had a cyber attack, you would be the first guy in line the next morning to buy policy. Another reason is for the small businesses needing it is they're getting required contractually a lot of the time to get it now. If you're working with bigger businesses, because they don't want to carry all the risk. I mean, any subcontractor or anyone that's working with any of these big places knows that they have this whole list of requirements you got to fulfill, because why would I take on all your risk? I have clients who sell to Amazon or Best Buy or Target. They all have all these requirements that you got to have. Interestingly, the Target hack that everyone knows about, the big bag, it wasn't Target that got hacked. It was an HVAC company that working for Target. They back-ended it through them. So once again, a great example of a small business that had the exposure and ended up causing this national, massive thing. You can be sure they're no longer a business, or at least, contract with Target.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's gone.
Yeah.
One thing too, you kind of touch base on it, and this is what business owners really need to think about too, is the reputational damage. Because if this is really just good business practices to be protecting your clients, customers, data, information, all that kind of stuff, right? So let's say something does happen and your customers are going to say to you, especially if you handle sensitive information, they're going to say, well, what were you doing before to really make sure that this was all secure? And you can't rewind the clock and say, well, you know, I mean, you have to tell them, well, we thought it was secure. You know,
Right.
that doesn't really hold a lot of water.
And people don't realize how much personal information they have. And that's like anything in the medical field, you have a plethora of information. But then you go into other industries, you know, insurance, we have everything on a person, you know, property management. I have lots of fun dealing with property managers. I mean, if you take applications for, you know, for rental stuff, you have every single bit of personal information on a person.
It's true.
So like people don't think about it, but like schools have everything on families, you know, whatever it is, you know, there are so many industries where you're like, oh yeah, we don't have any, you know, personal information. It's like, no, you have everything. You got their names, their addresses, their social security numbers, their place of work, you know, you name it, it's on there. So it just, you know, in the insurance industry, you know, you have their driver's license number, you have, you know, you have everything. So it's, I mean, if they get into your stuff, I mean, I don't know what the going rate is today, but you know, you sell a driver's license number online, you sell a credit card number online. I mean, there is a black market for all of these things, and you have it all stored. And I tell people all the time, you know, especially people that are not set up with auto bill through one of the carriers, you know, they'll call and say, oh yeah, can you just, I'm like, I don't keep credit card information. I don't want the headache. You can call me at the end of the month and I'll put it in and go from there. I don't want to be responsible for having it sitting on like a Post-it on my desk or saved in an Excel file somewhere. And God forbid someone gets a hold of it.
Right. Exactly. Yes. If you don't have to hold sensitive information, get rid of it. Right.
Exactly.
All right. Well, this was really, really helpful. Is there anything else you want to throw out there before we go? I mean, this was a lot of really good information for people who have small businesses, small and medium businesses, or any business.
Yeah. Just to throw out, like, it's becoming more mainstream, but people who got in before it got crazy, it was just a much easier process. Yes, you know, I'm dealing with a client right now as a renewal coming up next week on their cyber. They got in before a lot of the insanity, and they are going through this renewal now. Obviously, there was an increase. We're working on that part, but you know, even the application, you know, like the guy, like you said, the guy looked at it and like, okay, we're sending this outsourced IT guy to fill out because I have no idea what any of this means. But they just have a different understanding. It's a different relationship with the carrier because you can say like, hey, there's actually a history here of this is what they've done. They haven't had any, you know, anything be compromised. We know that they're a good client for several years as opposed to coming in now. It's like, well, you're late to the party and we have no idea what your risk profile is. I mean, obviously you're gonna put stuff on the application, but it's like, why didn't you have it until now? It's almost, to go back to what we were joking about before, if we started, like it's the responsible adult kind of thing. It's a little bit of a weird look. And I have this with businesses all the time. You start a small business and you're like, okay, we're going to wing it. And then you're 2 or 3 when it actually takes off and you're like, oh shoot, we're actually legit now. We need insurance. And you send in the applications. The carrier's like, how in the world did you work for 2 years and have $1 million in revenue and no insurance? So like sometimes it can come back to bite you because they're like, why were you winging it until now? That's not a good look.
Right.
So like as expensive as it is sometimes, especially as a younger business to get this stuff set up, setting it up properly in the beginning is always a good idea. Because you might not be able to get it later when they're kind of calling your bluff and saying like, well, this is not a good risk for us.
No, that's a very good point. And I'm sure it's got to play into the cost of the renewals. You know, obviously they're going up, but if you've had cyber liability insurance for, say, you know, 5 years, versus like what you're saying, someone who's like, ooh, wait a minute, we better get this, you know, there's got to be, because that history and because the relationship, that you're getting a discount versus just hopping in right now and being like you said, what have you been doing? You know, we just take it seriously.
You want to have a relationship with the company and you want to be able to show, again, these applications are basically showing that you're making it a concerted effort to protect it on your end. Like if I'm going to put myself on the line and say, hey, if something happens, I'm going to give it $1 million to deal with it. I want to know that you're at least trying. It's like, with homeowners insurance or with anything, like, I want to know that you have like, could someone forget to lock the front door? Yes, but like, if you're a responsible person that has deadbolts on the thing and has been insured for 20 years, and one night you forget to lock the door, like, okay, accidents happen. Same thing with driving. It's like, you're a responsible driver. You don't have a bunch of DUIs. You don't have a bunch of tickets.
Mm-hmm.
Someone get in an accident, yeah, but any of those things that show that you're actually trying is going to work to your advantage.
Yes, exactly. A for effort a little bit. Well, this was really, really good. So thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it and all of your information. And thank you everybody for watching. And we hope to see you on the next episode. Until then, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Have a great New Year, everybody.
That's right. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.